Dear learners, welcome back to the week 5 of this particular MOOC. This is the module 4, Identity, Stereotypes and Media Narratives. And we are going to discuss the unit number 15, which has been named Media and Feminist Movements. The relationship between media and feminism is one of the most dynamic and contested terrains in contemporary social movements. Media has simultaneously served as a platform for feminist voices, a barrier to gender equality, and a site of struggle over the representation of women and gender issues. From the suffragette newspapers of the early 20th century to the digital activism in the 21st century, feminist movements have both utilized and critiqued media to advance their goals of gender equality and social justice. So today in this lecture, we will try to explore the intricate connections between media and feminist movements across different historical waves of feminism. We will examine how feminists have employed print publications to disseminate their ideas and to analyze how mass media has portrayed feminism and investigate feminist film theory as a critical framework for understanding visual culture. So, understanding these relationships is crucial for comprehending both the evolution of feminist thought and the power of media in shaping social consciousness about gender. Now, let us have a look at the first wave feminism. First wave feminism primarily focused on legal issues, particularly women's suffrage and property rights. Emerging in the late 19th century in Western countries, this movement sought to challenge the legal and political exclusion of women from public life. The movement's central demand was the right to vote, but it also addressed issues such as access to education, employment rights, and marriage laws that treated women as property. The key characteristics and goals of this particular movement. The first wave was characterized by organized campaigns, public demonstrations, and civil disobedience. Activists like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the United States, Emmeline Pankhurst in Britain, and similar figures across Europe and other Western nations, they led movements that fundamentally challenged the patriarchal order. These women argued that political citizenship was essential for women to secure other rights and protections under the law. So, what is the media strategy in first wave feminism? First wave feminists recognized early on that controlling their narrative was essential to their success. They established their own newspapers and journals to circumvent the hostile and dismissive coverage they received in mainstream press. Publications such as The Revolution in the United States and Votes for Women in Britain, they served multiple purposes. They informed women about movement activities, they provided arguments for suffrage, they countered anti-feminist propaganda, and created a sense of community among geographically dispersed activists. The mainstream press of this era often ridiculed suffragettes, portraying them as unfeminine, hysterical, and threatening to social order. Political cartoons depicted suffragettes as mannish, unattractive, and neglectful of domestic duties. So, this hostile media environment made independent feminist publications not just useful but necessary for movement survival and growth. So, now let us have a little discussion about the second wave feminism. Second wave feminism emerged in the context of broader social movements in the 1960s. including civil rights, anti-war, and student movements. While first wave feminism focused primarily on legal equality, second wave feminism expanded its critique to encompass cultural and social equality, coining the famous phrase, the personal is political. This was done to highlight how private life was shaped by political and power relations. Second wave feminists addressed a broader range of issues, including workplace discrimination, reproductive rights, sexuality, domestic violence, and gender roles within the family. Key texts like Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique of 1963 and Kate Millett's Sexual Politics of 1970, they challenged the assumption that women found fulfillment solely through domesticity and motherhood. This wave saw the development of feminist theory as an academic discipline and the establishment of women's studies programs in the universities. Now let us have a look at media production and second wave feminism. Second wave feminists created an extensive network of alternative media, including newspapers, magazines, journals, newsletters, radio programs, and eventually cable television shows. Publications like Miss Magazine, which was founded in 1971, reached mainstream audiences while maintaining a feminist perspective. Underground feminist newspapers and magazines or zines provided spaces for more radical voices and grassroots organizing. The movement also engaged in media activism, protesting sexist advertising and demanding better representation of women in mainstream media. Groups like the National Organization for Women, NOW, organized campaigns against companies using demeaning images of women in their advertisements. So, feminists challenged the beauty industry, objectification of women's bodies, and the narrow range of roles available to women in television and film. If we talk about the theoretical developments, this period saw the emergence of feminist media studies as an academic field. Scholars began systematically analyzing how media perpetuated gender stereotypes and contributed to women's oppression. Laura Mulvey's groundbreaking essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema of 1975, introduced the concept of the male gaze, and it laid foundations for the feminist film theory, which we will try to explore in this particular lecture. Now let us have a look at the third wave feminism, which is supposed to be starting from 1990s to the early 2000s. So third wave feminism emerged in the 1990s as a response to perceived limitations of the second wave feminism and the changing social landscape. So the third wave was characterized by an embrace of diversity, contradiction, and individual expression. Third wave feminists critiqued second wave feminism for being dominated by white middle class women's perspectives and failing to adequately address intersectionality, which is the interconnected nature of social categorization such as race, culture, gender. So if we talk about the characteristics and priorities of third wave feminism, it tried to emphasize personal empowerment, sexual liberation, and the reclamation of terms and symbols which were previously considered derogatory. This wave celebrated diversity in women's experiences and rejected the idea of a single universal women's experience. Writers like Rebecca Walker, who coined the term third wave, and bell hooks, who emphasized intersectionality, they shaped this movement's inclusive approach. Third wave feminists were comfortable with contradictions and ambiguity. They argued that women could embrace femininity, enjoy popular culture, and still be feminists. This led to concepts like lipstick feminism and debates about whether activities traditionally seen as objectifying, such as sex work or beauty pageants, Could they be empowering when freely chosen? When we talk about the media landscape of third wave feminism, the third wave coincided with the rise of the internet, which fundamentally transformed feminist media production and consumption. Websites, blogs, and online forums, they created new spaces for feminist dialogue and activism. The decentralized nature of internet communication allowed for more diverse voices and rapid mobilization around issues. Zine culture flourished during this period, with publications like Bust and Bitch combining feminist politics with pop culture critique. These publications adopted an irreverent tone and visual style that contrasted with earlier feminist media. They reflected third wave feminism's relationship with popular culture, simultaneously critical and engaged. Third wave feminists also began to see popular culture not just as something to critique, but as a site for intervention and subversion. They engaged with fashion, music, television, and film, sometimes celebrating and sometimes criticizing how these media represented women and gender. Now let us have a look at the print publications and feminist movement. Print publications have been instrumental in every wave of feminism. They served as crucial tools for organizing, consciousness raising, and for theoretical development. The relationship between print media and feminism demonstrates how social movements create alternative public spheres when excluded from mainstream discourse. So, what are the functions of feminist print media? Feminist print publications have served multiple functions throughout history. They provided platforms for women's voices that are often marginalized in mainstream media. They facilitate networking and organizing by connecting activists across geographic distances. They serve educational purposes by explaining feminist concepts and providing analysis of current events from feminist perspectives. They document movement history, preserving records of campaigns, debates, and achievements that might otherwise be lost. Evolution of feminist publishing. Early feminist periodicals were often produced with minimal resources by small collectives. The suffragette press operated under constant financial pressure and sometimes legal threats. Despite these challenges, publications like the Women's Journal in the United States maintained consistent publication for decades, demonstrating the commitment of early feminists to maintaining their media presence. The second wave saw an explosion of feminist publishing. The major commercial magazine like Miss, it reached hundreds of thousands of readers, while countless smaller publications served local communities and specific constituencies. Academic journals like Science and Feminist Studies established feminism as a serious scholarly field. The feminist press also produced books, with the publishing houses like the Feminist Press and Virago Press making women's writing more accessible. Third wave and contemporary feminism has seen print publications adapt to digital formats. Many feminist magazines now exist primarily online, though some maintain print editions. The economics of publishing has shifted, with subscription models competing with free ad-supported content. Despite these changes, the impulse behind feminist publishing remains constant, creating spaces where women's perspectives are centered and feminist analysis is the norm rather than the exception. So, what are the challenges and limitations? Feminist print media has faced consistent challenges, including financial instability, limited distribution networks, and the difficulty of reaching beyond the already converted. Publications have struggled with questions of representation, like who speaks for feminism, whose voices are heard, and whose experiences are centered. These tensions have sometimes led to splits within the movements and the creation of new publications aimed at previously marginalized groups within feminism itself. Now let us have a look at the portrayal of feminism through the prism of mass media. Mass media's portrayal of feminism has been fraught with tension, misrepresentation, and occasional moments of genuine engagement. Understanding how mainstream media has depicted feminism is essential for grasping both the challenges feminists have faced and the evolution of public attitude towards gender equality. While talking about stereotyping and stigmatization, throughout its history, mainstream media has often portrayed feminists through negative stereotypes. Common tropes include the man-hating feminist, the humorless feminist, the unfeminine feminist, and the angry feminist. These stereotypes serve to discredit feminism by making it seem extreme, unreasonable, and personally unappealing. Media coverage has frequently focused on the most controversial aspects of feminist movements, while ignoring their substantive arguments and achievements. During the first wave, newspapers often mocked suffragettes, portraying them as neglecting their families and violating natural gender roles. Cartoons depicted suffragettes as unattractive and aggressive, playing on fears that women's political participation would upset social order. During the second wave, media coverage frequently emphasized bra burning, an event that rarely actually occurred, and other sensational aspects, while giving less attention to substantive issues like equal pay and reproductive rights. So let us now talk about the post-feminist narrative. In the 1980s and 1990s, mass media began promoting a post-feminist narrative, suggesting that feminism had achieved its goals and was no longer necessary. This discourse appeared in news coverage, television shows, and films that portrayed feminism as outdated or relevant only to a previous generation. The post-feminist narrative often suggested that young women could have it all without needing feminism, ignoring the persistent inequalities and the continued relevance of feminist analysis. This narrative served to depoliticize women's issues, framing them as matters of individual choice rather than structural inequality. Television shows and films of this era often featured successful women characters while avoiding discussion of systematic barriers or collective action for change. So now let us have a look at the contemporary media representation. In the recent years, mass media's portrayal of feminism has become more complex and varied. Some mainstream outlets have adopted feminist perspectives using terms like feminist positively and covering women's issues with greater depth and sensitivity. Celebrity feminism has brought feminist ideas to broader audiences, though it has also sparked debates about the commercialization and depoliticization of feminism. Social media has disrupted traditional media gatekeeping, allowing feminists to speak directly to audiences and challenge misrepresentations. Hashtag movements like hashtag #MeToo, hashtag Time's Up, and hashtag Yes All Women, they have demonstrated how digital media can amplify feminist messages and create widespread conversations about gender-based violence, harassment, and inequality. However, mass media continues to present challenges for feminism. Coverage of feminist issues often lacks historical context or depth. Media tend to focus on individual stories rather than systematic analysis. The rise of anti-feminist online communities and the platforming of anti-feminist voices in mainstream media demonstrate that the struggle over media representation continues. So what is the impact on public perception? Media portrayal significantly impacts public perception of feminism. Studies have shown that negative media stereotypes of feminists reduce people's willingness to identify as feminist, even when they support feminist goals. Conversely, positive representation and accurate information about feminism can increase support for gender equality measures. This makes media representation not just a symbolic issue, but one with real consequences for the feminist movement's ability to recruit supporters and achieve their goals. So, if we now talk about feminist film theory, it emerged in the 1970s as a part of the second wave feminism's broader project of analyzing how cultural institutions perpetuate gender inequality. This theoretical framework examines how films construct gender, represent women, and position viewers in gendered ways. Feminist film theory has profoundly influenced both academic film studies and practical filmmaking. It is important to discuss the male gaze here. The concept of the male gaze, which was introduced by Laura Mulvey in her 1975 essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, it is the foundational to feminist film theory. Mulvey argued that classical Hollywood cinema is structured around a masculine viewing position. The camera adopts a male perspective. Women are presented as objects of male desire, and viewers, regardless of their actual gender, are positioned to identify with male characters and to view women as the camera does, as a spectacle. Mulvey drew on psychoanalytic theory to explain how this visual structure produces pleasure for viewers. She identified two forms of pleasures in looking. Socophilia, which means pleasure in looking at others as objects, and identification with the image on screen. In classical cinema, men are the active agents of the narrative, while women are passive objects displayed for the male protagonists and the viewer's erotic contemplation. So, this framework explained why female characters so often appeared in films primarily for visual appeal rather than as full participants in the narrative. It revealed how cinematic technique like camera angles, lighting, editing, they constructed women as to be looked at rather than as subjects with their own perspective and desires. So let us have expansive and critical argument about the male gaze. So subsequent feminist film theorists have expanded and critiqued Mulvey's framework. Some argued that her analysis was too deterministic, leaving no room for resistant readings or female pleasure in cinema. Others pointed out that her focus on heterosexual masculine desire ignored other viewing positions and pleasures, including lesbian desire or female identification with active male heroes. So, scholars have explored the female gaze in films directed by women and in films that centered women perspectives. They have analyzed how some films offer moments of resistance or complexity within otherwise conventional structures. The concept of the oppositional gaze, developed by bell hooks, examined how marginalized viewers, particularly black women, have developed critical viewing practices that resist dominant stereotypes. If we talk about gender representation and stereotypes, feminist film theory examines the limited range of roles available to women in cinema. Classic Hollywood films tended to portray women as either Madonnas or whores, nurturing mothers or dangerous femme fatales. So these narrow representations reflect and reinforce social anxieties about women's sexuality and social roles. Feminist scholars have documented how films across different genres and eras have typically shown women in subordinate positions, defined primarily through their relationships with men, and punished for transgressing gender norms. So action films sideline women as love interests or victims needing rescue. Romantic comedies often present career women who must choose between professional success and romantic fulfillment. Horror films frequently punish female sexuality through violence. So now let us talk about intersectionality in film theory. More recent feminist film theory has increasingly incorporated intersectional analysis, examining how race, class, sexuality, and other identities intersect with gender in cinematic representation. So scholars have critiqued early feminist film theory for focusing primarily on white middle-class women's representation. They have analyzed how women of color, working-class women, and LGBTQ plus individuals are represented or excluded in cinema. So this work reveals how different groups of women are subjected to different stereotypes and how these representations serve various ideological functions. For example, scholarship on the representation of black women in films has examined stereotypes like the mammy in the famous movie Gone with the Wind, the Jezebel, and the Sapphire, showing these images have evolved but continue to constrain how black women are portrayed. Now let us talk a little bit about the feminist filmmaking practices. Feminist film theory has influenced feminist filmmaking practices. Filmmakers have experimented with alternative visual structures that refuse the male gaze, center women's subjectivity, and challenge conventional narrative forms. Directors like Agnes Varda, Chantal Akerman, Sally Potter, and Julie Dash have created films that present women as complex subjects rather than objects of display. Contemporary filmmakers continue to engage with feminist film theory's insights. Some work within mainstream genres while subverting their conventions. Others create experimental works that fundamentally challenge cinematic norms. The increasing number of women directors, cinematographers, and producers have begun to shift industry practices, though significant barriers remain. Now let us have a little discussion about the Bechdel test and popular feminism. The Bechdel test originated from Alison Bechdel's comic strip, which became popular tool for evaluating gender representation in film. The test asks whether a film features at least two women who talk to each other about something other than a man. While simplistic, the test has raised public awareness about how rarely films center women's lives and relationships with each other. This popularization of feminist film criticism demonstrates how feminist film theory's insights have moved beyond academia to influence broader conversations about media. Online discussions of representation, calls for diverse casting, and critiques of sexist storylines all draw, sometimes implicitly, on frameworks developed by feminist film theorists. So the relationship between media and feminist movements is characterized by ongoing negotiation, struggle, and creativity. Feminists have used media to spread their messages, build movements, and challenge dominant representations of gender. Simultaneously, they have critiqued how mainstream media perpetuates inequality and developed theoretical frameworks for understanding media's role in maintaining or challenging patriarchal structures. From first-wave suffragette newspapers to the third-wave zines to the contemporary digital activism, feminists have consistently recognized media's power to shape consciousness and to mobilize action. Print publications have created alternative public spheres where feminist ideas could circulate. Feminist film theory revealed how visual media constructs gender and positions viewers, providing tools for critical analysis and alternative practice. Mass media's portrayal of feminism has often been hostile or reductive, Yet feminists have persisted in challenging these representations and creating their own narratives. The digital age has brought new opportunities and challenges, democratizing media production while also enabling anti-feminist backlash. Understanding the media-feminism relationship is essential for anyone interested in gender equality, social movements, or media studies. It reveals how power operates through representation and discourse, how marginalized groups can create counter-narratives, and how cultural change occurs through sustained struggle over meaning and visibility. As media technologies and feminist movements continue to evolve, their relationship will undoubtedly produce new forms of both resistance and innovation. That's all for today. We will meet again in the next video. Thank you.